Billionaire's twins, raised by devoted black Nanny, return years later with a shocking twist that changes everything. Welcome to Alcott Stories, where every tale takes you to the edge of your seat. Immerse yourself in thrilling journeys of love, mystery, and unexpected twists. In a world where danger lurks around every corner and secrets hide in the shadows, only the bravest will survive. Are you ready for a story that will keep you guessing until the very last? The adventure starts now. Dive into the unknown with us at Alcott Stories. The sky was cruelly clear that morning. No clouds, no warning, just the endless blue that swallowed the Whitmore private jet whole. When the news broke, it didn't come softly. It roared through headlines, shattered boardrooms, and echoed through the marble halls of the Whitmore estate like a ghost with unfinished business. Billionaire philanthropists Jonathan and Clarissa Whitmore, once hailed as the power couple of New York's elite, had perished in a tragic plane crash over the Rockies, leaving behind not just an empire, but something far more fragile. 6-month-old twins, Lucas and Lily. They were too young to understand that their lives had just changed forever. But someone understood. Someone whose arms were already outstretched before the first camera truck pulled into the estate. Miss Evelyn Grace, the family's long-time nanny, stood on the grand staircase holding the crying infants, tears already carving silent trails down her cheeks. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with a kind of silent fury only a mother in her own right could feel. Evelyn had known love and loss. She had buried her own child years ago and had poured that broken love into the twins the day she met them. But this was different. The world saw her as help, but she knew she was more. She had been there when Lucas had his first fever, when Lily wouldn't sleep unless cradled against Evelyn's heartbeat. She had sung them lullabies from her Alabama childhood, whispered strength into their ears, while their parents jetted across the world to sign deals and cut ribbons. She loved them with the kind of quiet, all-consuming loyalty that doesn't make headlines, but builds legacies. And now, as the estate erupted into chaos, attorneys and distant relatives appeared like vultures cloaked in tailored suits and fake condolences. Evelyn watched them from the nursery doorway, their fake empathy scraping against the silence like knives. They were already eyeing the inheritance, arguing over trust funds and legal guardianship. Not one of them had ever changed a diaper, soothed a colicky cry, or stayed up all night when Lucas had croup. Yet here they were, reaching for the throne, not the children. Evelyn held the twins tighter that night, rocked them beneath the stained-glass window their mother once adored, and whispered a vow at their crib. "I will not let them have you. I will not let you be bought, sold, or forgotten." She stayed up all night, drafting a letter to the family lawyer, requesting guardianship, drawing from a copy of Clarissa's Secret, which she had found in an old drawer weeks before the crash, one no one knew about. In it, Clarissa had scrawled, almost desperately, "If anything happens, Evelyn is the only one I trust." The next morning, Evelyn found herself standing alone at the grave, 2 babies in her arms, and the press just beyond the gates, like wolves in the fog. The wind was cruel, flapping the hem of her coat, and she couldn't help but wonder if this was all by design. A crash? No survivors? No answers? It didn't sit right. Something in her gut twisted when she saw the sealed casket, pristine and closed. Too pristine. Clarissa had confided in her weeks ago, worried about their new business partner. She had mentioned strange phone calls, untraceable emails, and a gut feeling she couldn't shake. Evelyn had urged her to be careful. And now, here they were, gone. Buried. Silenced. Evelyn didn't cry in front of the cameras. She couldn't. Not yet. She stood tall, babies asleep on her chest, while people gave empty speeches and took photos like it was a red carpet. She waited until the very last mourner left before she knelt beside the tombstone and finally let herself unravel. She cried for Clarissa, her childhood friend who had once braided her hair and dreamed of building schools for girls. She cried for Jonathan, whose laugh could fill a room, but who had made too many enemies in business. But mostly, she cried for the twins, because they had no idea that the soft gilded world they'd been born into had just crumbled into dust. As dusk fell, she pressed her hand to the stone, murmured, "I will protect them with my life," and walked away, not as a nanny, but as a mother reborn. Back at the estate, the lawyer's face was pale when he read the hidden will Evelyn handed him, the ink still smudged from Clarissa's hurried handwriting. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "This changes everything," he whispered. Evelyn didn't smile. She simply said, "Good." That night, as a storm began to brew over Manhattan, Evelyn packed the nursery into boxes and carried the twins to bed, unaware that eyes were already watching and that secrets buried with the Whitmores would soon claw their way into the light. Rain lashed against the Whitmore mansion's grand windows like the world itself was grieving. But inside the nursery, Evelyn sat in the old rocking chair, a twin cradled in each arm, humming a melody from her past that no one else alive remembered. Her bones ached, her spirit was raw, and the storm outside mirrored the quiet war within her heart. The firelight flickered shadows across the nursery walls, dancing like ghosts of what was. Clarissa's perfume still clung faintly to the rocking chair, and a photograph on the wall smiled down with frozen joy. The young couple caught forever in laughter beside their newborns. Evelyn's eyes lingered on that photo as a question, one she didn't want to ask, gnawed at her soul. Had they been murdered? The storm thundered in response, and she pressed the babies closer to her chest. She couldn't let her suspicions distract her now. These children were hers to protect, even if the world saw her as just the help. But just the help had raised them. She had been there for their first words, their first fevers, their first real belly laughs. Clarissa had called her sister when no one else was looking. Jonathan, for all his power and pride, had once told Evelyn she was the real heart of the home. And now, that heart was all that remained. In the days that followed, Evelyn refused to let the press or lawyers take the children out of her sight. She stood like a lioness at every door, answered questions with grace, but gave no ground. The relatives circled, aunts and uncles who hadn't sent a Christmas card in years, suddenly arriving in luxury cars, smelling of entitlement and greed. A crash? No survivors? No answers? It didn't sit right. Something in her gut twisted when she saw the sealed casket, pristine and closed. Too pristine. Clarissa had confided in her weeks ago, worried about their new business partner. She had mentioned strange phone calls, untraceable emails, and a gut feeling she couldn't shake. Evelyn had urged her to be careful. And now, here they were, gone. Buried. Silenced. Evelyn didn't cry in front of the cameras. She couldn't. Not yet. She stood tall, babies asleep on her chest, while people gave empty speeches and took photos like it was a red carpet. She waited until the very last mourner left before she knelt beside the tombstone and finally let herself unravel. She cried for Clarissa, her childhood friend who had once braided her hair and dreamed of building schools for girls. She cried for Jonathan, whose laugh could fill a room, but who had made too many enemies in business. But mostly, she cried for the twins, because they had no idea that the soft gilded world they'd been born into had just crumbled into dust. As dusk fell, she pressed her hand to the stone, murmured, "I will protect them with my life," and walked away, not as a nanny, but as a mother reborn. Back at the estate, the lawyer's face was pale when he read the hidden will Evelyn handed him, the ink still smudged from Clarissa's hurried handwriting. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "This changes everything," he whispered. Evelyn didn't smile. She simply said, "Good." That night, as a storm began to brew over Manhattan, Evelyn packed the nursery into boxes and carried the twins to bed, unaware that eyes were already watching and that secrets buried with the Whitmores would soon claw their way into the light. Rain lashed against the Whitmore mansion's grand windows like the world itself was grieving. But inside the nursery, Evelyn sat in the old rocking chair, a twin cradled in each arm, humming a melody from her past that no one else alive remembered. Her bones ached, her spirit was raw, and the storm outside mirrored the quiet war within her heart. The firelight flickered shadows across the nursery walls, dancing like ghosts of what was. Clarissa's perfume still clung faintly to the rocking chair, and a photograph on the wall smiled down with frozen joy. The young couple caught forever in laughter beside their newborns. Evelyn's eyes lingered on that photo as a question, one she didn't want to ask, gnawed at her soul. Had they been murdered? The storm thundered in response, and she pressed the babies closer to her chest. She couldn't let her suspicions distract her now. These children were hers to protect, even if the world saw her as just the help. But just the help had raised them. She had been there for their first words, their first fevers, their first real belly laughs. Clarissa had called her sister when no one else was looking. Jonathan, for all his power and pride, had once told Evelyn she was the real heart of the home. And now, that heart was all that remained. In the days that followed, Evelyn refused to let the press or lawyers take the children out of her sight. She stood like a lioness at every door, answered questions with grace, but gave no ground. The relatives circled, aunts and uncles who hadn't sent a Christmas card in years, suddenly arriving in luxury cars, smelling of entitlement and greed. They offered her checks, bribes masked as gifts of thanks, but she saw their true intent: control, money, image. One woman even dared to say, "It's sweet that you're still here, Evelyn, but let's be honest, the children need their real family now." Evelyn's smile was so cold it could freeze blood. "They have their real family," she said, turning and walking away, baby on her hip. But behind the calm facade, she was terrified. Court battles were looming. The Whitmore family trust was powerful, yes, but also deeply political, layered with people who'd sell their souls for control. Clarissa's hidden will was valid, but the lawyer warned her, "They'll fight this. You'll need more than ink to win." So Evelyn did what she had always done. She poured herself into the children. Day and night. She read to them from Clarissa's favorite childhood books. She danced with them in the grand hallway to old records. She taught them to pray, to laugh, to find joy even in grief. When Lucas had night terrors, she sang to him. When Lily clung to her shirt like she might float away, Evelyn whispered, "I got you, baby. I always will." Yet the stress chipped at her. She began selling her own jewelry to cover extra security. She refused outside nannies, turning down dozens of offers from wealthy friends who offered to take the burden off her hands. They didn't understand. These children weren't a burden. They were a promise. The promise she had whispered over Clarissa's casket. And she would keep it, no matter the cost. One night, after a long day in probate court, Evelyn came home to find an envelope on the nursery floor. No return address. Inside was a photograph of her, walking with the twins, circled in red ink, and a note. "You're not the only one watching." Her heart stopped. She stumbled back, clutching the crib rail, as paranoia slithered through her like ice water. Who was watching? Why? Had she gone too far, digging into the plane crash? Her mind raced, and for the first time, she considered fleeing. But how could she run with 2 babies and no resources? That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in a chair with a baseball bat by her side, and both children curled against her chest, ready to fight shadows if she had to. Days turned into weeks. The battle for guardianship grew darker. Lawyers cross-examined her as if she were the criminal, not the savior. She was called emotionally unstable, unqualified, even opportunistic. But Evelyn stood firm, and in those darkest moments, the twins gave her strength. Lucas clapped whenever she entered a room. Lily gurgled when she kissed her cheek. That was love, pure and unbought. Finally, when the judge read Clarissa's hidden will aloud in court, the room fell silent. A storm of whispers followed, but the truth had weight, and it crushed the lies. Evelyn was granted full guardianship, though not without enemies. As she left the courtroom, a man in a charcoal suit whispered, "You may have won this round, but you don't know what you're guarding." She never saw his face again, but she never forgot those words. From then on, she rarely went out. She homeschooled the twins as they grew, teaching them kindness, history, math, but also how to question everything. She made birthdays magical even when money ran low, baking cakes from scratch, turning living rooms into adventure jungles. Every scraped knee, every broken toy, she fixed herself. They called her Mama Ev before they ever said Nanny. But behind her gentle eyes, Evelyn was always watching, always guarding, always fearing that someday the past would come knocking. And she was right. Because on a summer evening, just as the twins turned 5, Lucas walked into her room holding another envelope, this one addressed to the real guardian. It had no return name, but inside was a birth certificate. Not his, not Lily's, Evelyn's, and with it a single line typed in all caps, "We know who you really are." Her breath caught. What did they mean? Why now? And who were they? Suddenly, she wasn't just the protector of a legacy. She was the secret, a part of a history far more tangled than she'd ever imagined. And as the sun set behind the safe walls of their quiet country home, Evelyn realized something horrifying and powerful at once. She had spent years giving everything to protect them. But the time was coming when they'd need to protect her. The evening light cast long, golden shadows across the wooden floors as Evelyn stared down at the birth certificate in her trembling hands, her pulse pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. "We know who you really are." Those words blazed like fire behind her eyes, unraveling a truth she had buried deep within herself long before the Whitmores ever hired her, before Clarissa had whispered that promise with her dying eyes. But this paper, was a thread to a past she had never planned to expose, not even to the twins. She tucked the envelope into a lockbox and forced a smile when Lily ran in, asking for bedtime stories, but her hands were icy as she tucked the girl beneath her blanket, her lips murmuring a tale about stars and wishes, while her mind screamed with questions. Who had sent the letter? How long had they been watching? What else did they know? She hardly slept that night. And neither did the house, it seemed. Just before dawn, a loud crack shook the silence, a wooden groan from above, like a house clearing its throat. Lucas, now 12 and endlessly curious, woke first and wandered into the hallway, barefoot, following the sound up the stairs and into the attic door Evelyn had always kept locked. But this morning, the lock was broken. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob as a strange energy filled the air, something between fear and destiny. Slowly, he opened it. Dust motes danced in slivers of morning light. The attic smelled like old cedar and forgotten time. Boxes were stacked in uneven towers, some labeled in his mother's handwriting, others in handwriting he didn't recognize. He crept inside, drawn like a magnet to a locked trunk tucked beneath an old sheet. It wasn't locked anymore. Inside, he found photo albums, scribbled letters, and an audio cassette labeled for Evelyn. But what caught his eye was a worn leather folder stamped with his father's monogram, and inside a file containing aviation reports, black and white photos of the wreckage, and an internal memo from the Whitmore Corporation marked Confidential, Flight Irregularities. Lucas's breath caught. The dates matched the day of the crash. One line in red ink stood out like blood on snow. Flight route override detected. Unauthorized input. He didn't fully understand it, but he knew it meant the crash hadn't been an accident. Heart pounding, he tucked the folder under his arm and ran to Evelyn, who was sitting in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, her eyes distant. She nearly dropped the cup when she saw the folder. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice suddenly thin. Lucas pointed upstairs. "The attic. There's more." Evelyn's face lost color, but she didn't look surprised, only resigned, as if she had always known this moment would come. "You weren't supposed to see that." "Not yet." He stared at her, confused. "Did you know?" Evelyn closed her eyes. "I knew pieces, enough to be scared." She explained that weeks before the crash, Clarissa had confided in her about a dangerous partnership Jonathan had been pressured into, one with people who didn't play by rules. There had been threats, untraceable emails, and the night before their final flight, Clarissa had cried in Evelyn's arms and said, "If something happens, protect them." And never trust the board. Evelyn had kept that promise. She had fled, gone off-grid, erased the twins' digital footprints, and kept quiet. For them. But now the past was crawling through the cracks in the walls. Evelyn led Lucas back to the attic, where they began opening boxes together, uncovering more files, unsent letters, and old voicemail recordings from Jonathan to Clarissa, begging her to leave the board, saying, "They're watching us. The deal is poison. We've gone too deep." Lucas listened with wide eyes and a churning stomach. Meanwhile, Lily, sensing tension, wandered upstairs and found a dusty jewelry box beneath a false floorboard. Inside was a locket with a hidden memory card. Evelyn plugged it into her old laptop and gasped. The card contained footage of Jonathan in his study, whispering urgently to the camera. "If you're seeing this, I'm probably dead. Our jet isn't safe. There's sabotage in the company. Evelyn, you know what to do." The video cut out. For a moment, all three of them just sat in stunned silence, the truth heavy as stone. Then Evelyn stood and locked the attic. "No more secrets," she said, though her voice trembled. But as they left, none of them noticed the tiny red blinking light in the corner. Someone else had been recording. That night, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind reeling, not just from the Whitmore secrets, but from her own. Because her birth certificate, had revealed something she had never told a soul. Her birth name wasn't Evelyn Grace. It was Evelyn Whitmore, Jonathan's half-sister, illegitimate, forgotten, hidden, which meant she wasn't just the nanny. She was family. And someone out there didn't want that truth to surface. But now the clock was ticking. The twins were asking questions, and the house that had once felt like a fortress now felt like a trap. Still, Evelyn would not run. She had raised these children in love and sacrifice, taught them the value of truth and justice, and now, together, they would finish what their parents started. But first, they had to dig deeper, into secrets, into lies, and into the heart of a legacy more dangerous than they ever imagined. Evelyn stood at the attic window that night, the locket and birth certificate clutched in one hand, the faint reflection of her own weary face staring back from the glass like a stranger she was meeting for the first time. A Whitmore by blood, by secret, by betrayal. And yet never by name. The truth burned through her like fire and ice. She, the woman scorned by the very family who later entrusted her with their children's lives, had once been erased so carefully from history that even she had stopped believing she mattered. But now, the lies were cracking. And the twins, now old enough to ask dangerous questions, deserved to know the whole story. Yet Evelyn also knew this. Truth was power, and power was peril. She couldn't simply drop this revelation into their lives without also exposing them to the enemies that still lingered in the shadows. So, she chose a careful middle ground. She gathered Lucas and Lily in the sitting room, firelight dancing across the wallpaper, and shared fragments of her past. How she had been raised in the servant quarters of the old Whitmore estate in Alabama. How her mother had once been Jonathan's housekeeper. And how whispers of an affair had destroyed her childhood and sent her mother into silence. "They called me a stain," she whispered, eyes shimmering. "But I chose to become a shelter." The children listened with wide, conflicted eyes, torn between shock, sympathy, and a sudden, fierce pride. Lucas, always protective, moved closer to her and placed his hand on hers. "Then we're even more yours than we thought," he said. But Evelyn's heart ached as she saw the weight of legacy fall upon them, like a crown too heavy for youth. She tried to shield them from the rest, the corporate betrayal, the threats, the blinking light in the attic camera she still couldn't trace. But fate was not in a merciful mood. The next morning, a black SUV idled at the end of their long gravel driveway. A man in a perfectly pressed suit stepped out. Vincent Hale, the executor of the Whitmore Trust and former board member, whose icy smile had never quite reached his eyes. He claimed he was there to review custody clauses and financial distributions, but Evelyn knew better. When she refused to let him inside, he handed her a white envelope and said calmly, "You should be careful what boxes you open, Miss Grace. Some secrets are sealed for a reason." As he drove away, Lily tugged Evelyn's sleeve and whispered, "He scares me." Evelyn nodded. "Me too." Inside the envelope was a court summons. Someone had filed a petition to challenge her guardianship again. But not a Whitmore. This was signed by someone named Marlena Crowley. The name jolted her memory like lightning through her spine. Marlena, the cold, calculating former assistant to Jonathan, fired years ago for leaking private data to an anonymous investor. Evelyn had seen her once in Clarissa's office, lurking like a shadow behind a closed door. Why now? Why return? She dug deeper. That night, Evelyn dusted off her old laptop and accessed a secure drive Clarissa had once shown her, hidden behind layers of encryption. What she found made her blood run cold. Financial records, voice messages, a series of emails from Marlena to a figure named B. Orr, offering data on the Whitmore's holdings, warning of Evelyn's legal guardianship, and suggesting she had too much personal interest to remain neutral. One message read, "She's not just the nanny. She's his sister. If this leaks, the board loses everything." Evelyn slammed the laptop shut, her breath ragged. So Marlena knew, and she was trying to use it to strip Evelyn of the children, and possibly much more. At dinner, the tension hung heavy. Lucas watched her, silently calculating, as if sensing the unspoken danger. Later that night, when the house was asleep, Evelyn crept into the nursery and found an old journal Clarissa had kept hidden behind the bookshelf. Inside were heartbreaking entries. "I don't know who to trust. Evelyn is the only one who sees me. If we don't make it back from Aspen, she'll raise them the way I dreamed." And then one final line, dated just days before the crash. "I think they're going to kill us." Evelyn collapsed to her knees, the journal pressed to her heart, tears streaming. She whispered, "I tried, Clarissa. I tried to protect them. But they're still coming." The next morning brought another twist. A letter from a private school the twins had applied to months ago. Rejection? No explanation. A note scribbled on the bottom. "We don't want entanglement with unstable guardians." Evelyn's jaw clenched. Marlena was already pulling strings. Determined not to be cornered, Evelyn called in the one favor she had left, from Marcus Devlin, a tech genius and reclusive family friend who owed Clarissa a debt. He came that night in a battered jeep, hair disheveled, eyes sharp. "You're in deeper than I thought," he said after scanning her files. "You're not just a threat to the board, Evelyn. You're the key." Marcus revealed what Evelyn had always suspected. Jonathan had intended to dissolve the board and transfer controlling interest of the Whitmore Empire into a humanitarian trust in the twins' names. Evelyn, as guardian and blood, was the legal steward. But the original document had vanished after the crash, until Marcus found traces of it on a corrupted drive. "They tried to erase you," he said, "but they didn't expect you to fight back." That night, Evelyn sat with Lucas and Lily, heart thudding, and said softly, "There's something you need to know about who I really am." She showed them the birth certificate, the journal, the locket, and when she finished, Lucas reached across the table and whispered, "Then they messed with the wrong family." Evelyn wept for the first time in front of them, not out of weakness, but because their love, pure and unflinching, broke something open inside her that had been locked for decades. But as thunder rolled across the hills again, and headlights flickered once more at the edge of the woods, they all knew this battle was far from over. The blood in their veins had bought them a legacy, but only love and truth could help them survive it. The storm outside raged with a fury that seemed to match the turmoil inside the Whitmore estate, and Evelyn, standing at the threshold of the grand living room, felt as if the weight of the world had finally found its way to her doorstep. As the last of the thunder faded into the distance, she glanced at Lucas and Lily, their innocent faces still glowing with an unwavering love that filled her heart with warmth despite the fear churning in her gut. She had always tried to protect them, but now, more than ever, she realized that the battle was no longer just about keeping them safe from the corporate vultures lurking outside. It was about surviving the relentless storm of betrayal, secrets, and danger that had been unleashed from within. The night had drawn its cloak over them, yet the darkness outside seemed to pale in comparison to the shadows now creeping through their lives. Evelyn paced, her fingers gripping the edge of the mantel, her thoughts spinning in a cyclone of uncertainty. She had made the decision to reveal her true identity to the twins, but in doing so, she had opened a door to a future she wasn't sure she was ready for. How could she explain to them that the very blood running through her veins was a tie to a family that had long since turned its back on her, a family willing to do anything to reclaim their empire, no matter the cost? But even as the twins processed the enormity of their newfound heritage, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching, waiting to make their move. And that feeling became a certainty when a series of knocks interrupted her thoughts. At first, she hesitated. No one came at this hour unless they were planning something nefarious, and Evelyn had learned long ago to trust her instincts. But when the doorbell rang again, louder this time, a sense of foreboding gripped her heart. She knew it was them, the enemies who had been circling, watching from the shadows. She opened the door cautiously, only to find a man standing in the doorway, his face masked with an unreadable expression. He was tall, wearing a well-fitted coat, and in his hand he held a briefcase. "Evelyn Whitmore?" he asked, his voice smooth but laced with an underlying menace. "I have a letter for you." The weight of those words seemed to reverberate through her chest. He wasn't just any messenger. He knew exactly who she was. Without a word, she stepped aside, her instincts screaming that every step she took closer to this stranger was a step closer to the dangerous game she was trapped in. She took the letter from him, her hands shaking as she unfolded the paper, but the words on the page sent a chill racing down her spine. "We know you've uncovered the truth, Evelyn. The games are about to begin. And this time, you're not the one calling the shots." The message was unsigned, the handwriting deliberately scrawled in jagged, uneven strokes. She slammed the door shut with a sense of finality, her breath ragged as the enormity of what they had just declared sank in. Someone was manipulating every move she made, and with each passing moment, the walls were closing in. It wasn't just the Whitmore family anymore. It was the world, her world, that was conspiring to erase them all. As Evelyn turned to face Lucas and Lily, the fear in their eyes mirrored her own. But what could she say? That they had just signed up for a war they didn't understand. That their blood was no longer a blessing, but a weapon? She couldn't burden them with that truth. Not yet. The only thing she knew for sure was that they couldn't stay here. Not anymore. They had to disappear. As she paced back and forth, trying to formulate a plan, there was a knock at the door again, this time from a different direction. It was soft, hesitant, almost like a child's knock. Yet something about it felt wrong. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Was it Marlena? Or someone else sent to lure them out into the open? She opened the door, but to her surprise, it was a woman she'd never seen before. A tall, striking figure with dark eyes that seemed to hold too many secrets. "I know this isn't the best time," the woman said, her voice calm but strained. "But I need to speak with you. It's about the Whitmore estate." Evelyn stiffened. She could tell from the woman's posture, her eyes scanning the interior of the house like a predator sizing up her prey, that she wasn't here to offer assistance. She was here to settle something, perhaps an old score. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady but laced with suspicion. "My name is Valerie Moore. Well, I used to work with your brother, Jonathan, and there's something I need to show you." Evelyn stepped back, motioning for the woman to enter. She couldn't afford to miss a chance, not with everything at stake. Valerie sat down across from her, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's, a hint of regret hanging in the air between them. "I'm not here to hurt you, Evelyn, but I can help you, if you're willing to listen." Evelyn narrowed her gaze. "Help? After everything that's happened? After what your family did to us? You think I'm going to trust you?" Valerie's face softened, and she sighed. "You don't have to trust me, but you do need to know the truth. Jonathan's death? It wasn't an accident." The words dropped like stones into a pool of water, rippling across Evelyn's mind as shock set in. Her hand trembled as she reached for the letter the man had given her, the one that warned her of the games to come. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Valerie leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a faction within the Whitmore board. Marlena, yes, but she's not the only one. There's a deep conspiracy to keep you and those children out of power, and I know how they plan to do it." Evelyn's heart raced as the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, but they were still incomplete. Was Valerie another pawn? Or could she be the key to unraveling the deadly web of lies, betrayals, and twisted family secrets that had ensnared them all? Evelyn's resolve hardened. If Valerie could help her expose the truth, if this woman could be trusted, then she would have no choice but to fight, tooth and nail, for everything she had fought so hard to protect. "What do I need to do?" Evelyn asked, her voice cold with determination. But deep down, she could feel the pulse of something greater inside her. Love for the twins, her own hidden strength, and a growing sense that she was on the brink of uncovering a truth that would change everything. And as Valerie began to speak, Evelyn felt the first sparks of a plan igniting in her chest, a plan that would force the Whitmore family to reckon with the truth they had tried to bury for so long. But that plan would require more than courage. It would require sacrifice. And Evelyn knew, as she looked at the children, that the greatest battles were yet to come. Evelyn's heart thundered as Valerie's words lingered in the air, heavy with a promise of truth she couldn't yet grasp. The weight of the hidden conspiracy, the betrayal, the shadowy figures circling her family, was so immense that it felt like the walls of the house were closing in with every passing second. She had always suspected that the Whitmore estate was more than just a family legacy. It was a battlefield of lies, manipulation, and greed. But this revelation was something darker, something deeper than she could have imagined. Valerie's voice, though calm, was filled with an urgency that echoed in Evelyn's chest. The board isn't just trying to control the company, Evelyn. They want the twins. They want their bloodline, and they'll stop at nothing to make sure no one else has a claim. That's why they're coming after you. And the children. They want to erase you. Evelyn clenched her fists, her entire body pulsing with a storm of emotions. Fear, anger, disbelief, but most of all, a fierce determination to protect the twins at any cost. The thought of losing them to the same family that had stolen everything from her, her identity, her worth, and her mother's dignity, made her blood boil. But as Valerie continued, detailing the secret alliances, backdoor deals, and silent promises whispered between the board members, Evelyn felt the suffocating grip of reality tighten around her throat. They had planned this for years, she realized. They had always known Evelyn, the supposed outsider, was a threat to their control. Her bloodline, her hidden connection to Jonathan, her capacity for love and sacrifice, made her the one person who could truly upend their plans. Valerie's words grew sharper, more urgent. There's a file, Evelyn. A file that links your mother to a man at the top of the chain, someone even Jonathan feared, a powerful ally of Marlena's. This file could be the key to everything. Evelyn's stomach twisted with a mixture of dread and hope. A file? How could something so simple hold the key to unlocking the conspiracy they had been hiding? She had to find it. She had to. But as she stood there, the weight of the decision pressing on her, another knock interrupted their conversation. This time, it wasn't a stranger. It was Lucas, his face pale and strained, his eyes wide with something between panic and revelation. "Mum, I think someone's been in the house." The hairs on the back of Evelyn's neck stood up. She knew the house well, knew every creak, every shadow, every corner where memories were buried. But this was different. Something was off. "What do you mean?" she asked, stepping toward him, her pulse quickening. I don't know. It's hard to explain. But I found something." The words caught in her throat, a tremor of fear in his voice. "Something that doesn't belong." The twins had never been exposed to the darker side of their family's legacy, the hidden threats, the faceless enemies who had been lurking for years. But in this moment, Evelyn saw it in their eyes. The truth that they weren't just bystanders in this dangerous game. They were players, too. She followed Lucas upstairs, her heart hammering in her chest. He led her to his bedroom, where he had pulled out a small silver key from his drawer, a key he hadn't seen before. It was old, ornate, and strangely familiar. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as recognition flickered across her mind. It was the same key she had once seen Jonathan use. A key that opened a hidden compartment in the study, a compartment that had been sealed away for years. Her heart raced as she turned to Lucas, her voice strained. "Where did you find this?" Lucas swallowed hard. "In the library, behind the bookshelf. I think it's for something big." Evelyn's world tilted. It was no coincidence. Whoever had been in the house had left this key for a reason, and if it had anything to do with the file Valerie mentioned, they were one step closer to unraveling the truth. As they descended to the study, Evelyn's thoughts ran wild. Who could have been here? Who could have gotten so close without her knowing? She couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching them for far longer than she had realized, orchestrating the moves from behind the scenes. The key slid easily into the lock, and with a sharp click, the compartment opened. Inside, there was a single folder, old, worn, sealed with a red wax emblem she recognized instantly. The Whitmore seal. Her hands shook as she lifted the folder, her heart in her throat. She opened it carefully, revealing a series of photographs, contracts, and letters. But one document, in particular, stood out, an affidavit signed by Jonathan, his signature shaky, his words a frantic plea. "If I don't make it back." The rest of the text was blurred, smudged by time, or something more sinister. Evelyn's pulse raced as she scanned the rest of the document. In the margins, there was a single phrase circled in red ink. Marlena Crowley, key player in the conspiracy. The realization hit her like a wave crashing over rocks. Marlena. She had been part of this, part of the plan to keep the twins from their birthright. But how far did this go? What were they willing to do to keep their power intact? Before she could process any more, a sudden bang from downstairs startled them all. Footsteps echoed down the hall, rapid, heavy. Evelyn's breath hitched. She wasn't alone. The fear was palpable now, suffocating the air. But Lucas stepped forward, his face set with a newfound determination. "We won't let them take us, Mum," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. For a moment, Evelyn simply looked at him, this boy who had already carried the weight of so much at his young age. The bond between them was undeniable, unbreakable. She kissed the top of his head, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. "We'll fight together, I promise." The sound of footsteps grew louder. Someone was coming, and Evelyn knew it wasn't just any intruder. It was Marlena's people, the ones who had been watching them, waiting for their moment to strike. She couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. "Lucas, Lily, get to the basement, now." Panic flashed across their faces, but they didn't argue. As they ran down the hall, Evelyn stood frozen for a moment, clutching the file to her chest. The storm outside had nothing on the tempest that was coming for them. This was it. This was the moment when they would either rise or fall, when every choice she had made would either protect or destroy the ones she loved. The game had shifted. They had shifted it. And Evelyn, with every ounce of love, strength, and fury she possessed, was ready to fight back. But first, she needed to find out everything about the mysterious men and women who would stop at nothing to take everything from her. It was time to play their game. And this time, she would be the one making the moves. The moment the door slammed shut behind Lucas and Lily, Evelyn felt the gravity of the situation settle in, suffocating the air in the house. Every heartbeat seemed to echo louder, thumping in her chest as she held the file against her body like a shield. The footsteps downstairs grew nearer, growing heavier with every passing second. Her mind raced. She couldn't let them get to the twins. Not now. Not when they were so close. Her fingers tightened around the file, her knuckles white. There was no more time for hesitation. She had spent too many years fighting against a world that wanted to strip her of everything, her family, her dignity, her future. And now the time had come to take the fight back to the enemy. As she sprinted down the hallway to the front door, her pulse quickened, but she didn't allow herself to stop. The sudden crack of breaking glass somewhere behind her jolted her into action, a sharp reminder that every second mattered. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Every muscle in her body was screaming with the primal need to protect the twins, to keep them hidden away from the shadowy world that was closing in on them. The house had always been a sanctuary, a place she could control. But now, with every creak of the floorboards, every movement in the shadows, it felt more like a trap. And as she reached the door, her hand froze on the handle. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure she hadn't expected, Marlena Crowley. The woman's dark eyes gleamed with an unsettling calmness, her expression unreadable, but full of calculation. She didn't say a word at first, just stood there, watching Evelyn with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "You've been busy, haven't you?" Marlena's voice was smooth, dripping with the kind of menace that only years of manipulating power could produce. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat, and she stepped back instinctively, though she knew it was futile to retreat. She had nowhere to go. The twins were somewhere below, hiding, but how much time did they have? How long before Marlena's men found them? "What do you want, Marlena?" Evelyn's voice was steady, but the fear clawing at her throat was impossible to ignore. "I want what's rightfully mine." Marlena's smile was chilling, full of hidden meaning. "And I'll do whatever it takes to get it. You've had your fun, Evelyn. You've been hiding behind your little secrets, playing house with those children. But now the game is over." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, each syllable digging into Evelyn's chest, each syllable a reminder that the life she had built, the life she had fought for, was in jeopardy. She could feel the weight of the file in her hands, but she knew it wouldn't be enough to protect her. Marlena was too powerful, too entrenched in this world of lies and manipulation. Evelyn was just a pawn in a game too big for her to win. But something inside her flared, something more than fear. It was the love for the twins, the raw, unshakable bond that connected her to them, that made her willing to risk everything. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. "You won't get away with this," Evelyn said, her voice shaking, but not with fear. More like rage, a storm brewing inside her. Marlena stepped closer, her heels clicking on the marble floor, echoing in the silence. "I already have," she purred. The air between them crackled with tension, a war waiting to erupt. Evelyn felt every instinct within her scream to run, to get to Lucas and Lily, but she couldn't afford to leave this confrontation unfinished. She had to stand her ground, to show Marlena that she wasn't just a victim. But as Marlena took another step forward, her eyes narrowed. Something shifted. Something off. Evelyn's gut twisted in response, a feeling so strong it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. This wasn't right. "What are you really after?" Evelyn asked, her voice quiet but firm. Marlena paused, her lips curling into a thin smile. "After all this time, Evelyn, you still don't understand the game, do you?" Her voice dripped with derision, as if she were speaking to a child. "It's not about the twins. It's about you. The only thing standing between me and total control is you." Evelyn's stomach lurched. She thought she knew the stakes. She thought she had understood the danger. But now, the truth was unfolding in ways she hadn't prepared for. Marlena wasn't just after the twins. She was after her. A sharp, cruel laugh slipped from Marlena's lips as she stepped closer again, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's. "You were always too naive, Evelyn. Always too much of a good girl to see the power that runs beneath everything. This empire isn't just built on bloodline and legacy. It's built on control. And you, Evelyn, you've been the thorn in my side for far too long. But don't worry. It's almost over." The words sliced through Evelyn like a knife, leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. She felt the weight of the file heavy in her hands, the pages inside holding the key to everything, the truth she had fought so hard to uncover. But was it too late? Was she too late? The sound of movement upstairs broke through her thoughts. Lucas and Lily. They were coming. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Marlena had planned this moment, engineered it with precision. She had known all along where Evelyn would go, where the children would hide. And now, with the walls closing in, Evelyn had only one option left. The door to the basement was still locked. There was a chance to escape. Evelyn turned abruptly, taking the file with her, her mind racing through every escape route, every possibility. But just as she reached for the door, Marlena's voice stopped her, dead in her tracks. "You think you can run, Evelyn?" She laughed, dark and mocking. "It's too late. It was always too late." The sense of finality in her voice made Evelyn's stomach twist. But just as the tension reached its breaking point, the door to the living room slammed open with a force that shook the walls. Lucas and Lily stood there, fear and determination flashing in their eyes, and behind them, the last person Evelyn had ever expected to see. "Enough, Marlena. Jonathan Whitmore, alive." The words barely registered in Evelyn's mind as she turned to face him, disbelief ripping through her like a storm. Her heart stopped. Jonathan? How could this be? He had been dead for years. And yet, there he stood, strong, composed, his eyes locked with hers, filled with both sorrow and something darker, something harder. Marlena's eyes widened, but she didn't move. "You're too late, Jonathan. She's already ours." Jonathan's voice was calm, almost resigned as he took a step toward Marlena. "No, Marlena. This time, it's you who's finished." The room fell into a suffocating silence as Jonathan stepped forward, his gaze unwavering, locked on Marlena, whose shock was quickly replaced by a hard, calculated glare. Evelyn stood frozen, caught between disbelief and a growing wave of emotions she couldn't yet process. Jonathan? Alive? After everything they had gone through, after the years of grief, the constant fear, and the struggle to protect the twins from the shadows of their past, he was standing there, so effortlessly composed, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her as she searched Jonathan's face for any sign of explanation. "Jonathan, how?" The question tumbled from her lips, desperate, aching with the need for answers. His eyes softened for a moment as he turned to her, the faintest hint of regret flickering across his features before it was quickly masked. "I never wanted you to find out this way," he said quietly, his voice strained with the weight of unspoken truths. Evelyn's pulse quickened, her mind spinning. This way. What did he mean? Her breath hitched, and she took a step toward him, her voice shaky. "Where have you been?" "All these years. You just disappeared. And I thought—" Jonathan raised a hand, silencing her, his expression filled with a deep, almost mournful intensity. "I had to disappear, Evelyn. It wasn't safe for you or the children. I was a target, a pawn in a larger game. And you were the one person Marlena never expected to fight back." Marlena's laugh cut through the tension like a knife, harsh and mocking. "You think this changes anything, Jonathan? She's already tangled in the web, already a part of the game. You're just a ghost, a memory that doesn't belong here anymore. But Jonathan wasn't listening to her. His focus remained entirely on Evelyn, his voice soft yet firm. Marlena isn't just after the children, Evelyn. She's after all of us. Our bloodline, our legacy. There are secrets we never told you, things I couldn't risk you knowing. But now, it's time. Evelyn's world tilted on its axis as the weight of his words settled in. The files she had been holding, the photographs, the affidavit. It all started to make sense. Jonathan had known about the conspiracy all along. He had been trying to protect them from the shadows, from the forces that wanted to control everything they stood for. But why hadn't he come back sooner? Why hadn't he fought for them earlier? You lied to me, Evelyn whispered, the hurt spilling out before she could stop it. Jonathan's eyes flinched, but his gaze never wavered. No, Evelyn, I didn't lie. I was protecting you. I wanted to come back, but it wasn't the right time. Not when Marlena was watching every move I made. I had to be sure she wouldn't catch on to me. I had to outsmart her, make her believe I was gone for good. Evelyn's heart shattered as she absorbed the weight of his confession. For years, she had fought alone. For years, she had protected the twins without knowing that the one person she thought she could trust had been out of reach, playing a dangerous game in the shadows. The bitterness rose in her throat. But it wasn't just anger. It was betrayal. How could he have left them? You don't get to say that, Evelyn said, her voice trembling with emotion. You don't get to tell me that you were protecting me when you were gone for so long. You weren't here when I needed you. You weren't here when the world came crashing down on us. Jonathan's face darkened, his jaw tightening. But before he could respond, Marlena stepped forward, her expression full of disdain. You're wasting your time, both of you, she spat, her voice venomous. The game is over. This is my victory. But Jonathan didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his presence commanding, and for the first time since his return, he looked alive. Truly alive, with a fire burning in his eyes that Evelyn hadn't seen in years. It's not over, Marlena. Not by a long shot. Marlena's smirk faltered for a split second, and in that moment, Evelyn realized something. Jonathan had a plan. He had always had a plan, even in the years he had been gone. But what was it? What had he been working on? What could he possibly do to defeat someone like Marlena, someone so deeply entrenched in the power structures that governed their world? Marlena glared at him, then turned her attention to Evelyn, her smile returning, cold and cruel. You think you're going to stop me, Evelyn? You're nothing more than a pawn in a game you don't even understand. You never were anything more. Her words stung like daggers, but Evelyn stood taller, stronger, her heart steeling itself against the venom. She was done being a pawn. She was done being the victim. Jonathan was right. This was the moment. This was the time to fight back. You're wrong, Marlena, Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength. I'm not a pawn. I'm a mother. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect my family. She felt the file heavy in her hands, the truth that had been buried for so long. And in that moment, everything clicked. The file was the key. It wasn't just evidence of Marlena's treachery. It was the blueprint for their escape, the blueprint for bringing down everything Marlena had built. We have the truth now, Evelyn continued, her eyes locked on Marlena's, unflinching. And the truth has a way of exposing everything in the end. Marlena's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "Do you think you can take me down with a piece of paper? It's already too late." Jonathan's voice rang out, low and commanding. "It's never too late." The tension in the room was suffocating, the weight of their words heavy in the air. Evelyn's heart raced, her mind scrambling to piece everything together. They were so close to the truth, so close to unraveling Marlena's empire of lies. But with the truth came the danger. Marlena wasn't going to let them walk away without a fight. And as if on cue, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. More men, more of Marlena's goons, closing in, surrounding them. Evelyn's mind raced. There was no way out unless they made one. But how? And what if Jonathan's return was a trap? What if they were walking right into Marlena's hands, believing they were in control when they were already caught in her snare? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice. Lucas, his face pale, but his eyes filled with fierce determination. "We're ready, Mum. We won't let them win." And in that moment, Evelyn understood. She wasn't alone anymore. The children were ready to fight with her. The world might have tried to tear them apart, but they were stronger than ever. It was no longer about Jonathan's return or Marlena's manipulations. It was about family. It was about love. And no matter how twisted the game had become, they were going to fight. They had to. With the truth in their hands, they would rise, together. And Marlena, for all her power, would fall. The air in the house was thick with tension, every breath feeling heavier than the last, as Evelyn stared at Lucas, his face set with determination, the fierce light in his eyes a mirror of her own resolve. Behind him, Lily stood protectively, her small hand grasping the edge of his sleeve, her gaze unwavering, as though she could sense the storm closing in around them. Jonathan, standing tall beside them, his expression hardening with the same steely focus that had carried him through years of hiding, glanced at Marlena with a quiet intensity. The final confrontation was upon them, and there was no turning back. Evelyn felt a surge of love and protectiveness for her children. These were her children, her heart, her soul, the reason she had endured so much, and she wasn't going to let anyone tear them away. Her hand instinctively reached out to hold Lucas's, and she felt his grip tighten around hers, a silent promise exchanged between mother and son. The weight of the moment settled in as Evelyn slowly turned to Jonathan, her heart a storm of emotions. He had been the love of her life, the man she had trusted with everything, even when he'd vanished without a trace. She had fought so hard to shield the children from the world's cruel hands, yet here they were, together once again, facing the very woman who had tried to tear their lives apart. She had questions. So many questions. Why did you leave me? Why didn't you come back sooner? But now there was no time for them. There was no room for betrayal or old wounds. This was the moment they had been preparing for. This was the moment when all the years of pain, loss, and heartbreak would culminate in a final stand for their future. Jonathan caught her eye, his gaze full of quiet understanding. "We're in this together now, Evelyn. No more secrets. No more running." The raw emotion in his voice made Evelyn's throat tighten, and despite everything, she felt a flicker of hope in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't too late. She wasn't alone. They weren't alone. She had spent so many years fighting in the dark, hiding from Marlena's reach. But now the tables were turning. The children once so innocent in this twisted game, were ready to fight alongside them. They had learned, grown, and prepared for this moment. They were the future, and nothing would take that from them. She knew it deep in her soul. Yet the sound of Marlena's cruel laugh snapped her back to reality, bringing with it a cold gust of dread that swept through the room. "You think you can win, don't you?" Marlena's voice was laced with amusement, but there was an edge to it, a threat too sharp to ignore. Her eyes flicked toward the men gathering in the hallway, closing in on them from every side. "You're trapped. There's nowhere to run. No way out. I've played this game too long to lose now." The walls felt like they were closing in, but Evelyn squared her shoulders, her heart racing but determined. She had already lost too much to fear Marlena's empty threats. She had to protect her family, and she would. "We won't let you get away with this," Evelyn said, her voice clear, even though her pulse was thundering in her ears. "You've taken enough from us. Enough!" Jonathan stepped forward, his eyes dark with resolve. "You've built your empire on lies and manipulation, Marlena, but the truth always comes to light. And we have it now." Marlena's eyes flickered momentarily to the file in Evelyn's hands, but she quickly masked her expression with a sneer. "Do you think a few papers will change anything? You don't understand what you're dealing with. I've spent my life building this empire. I won't let anyone, least of all you, tear it down." "Then you don't know us," Jonathan replied quietly. "We're not going anywhere, Marlena. We're not afraid of you anymore." The words were like a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. The tension that had been hanging in the air snapped, thick and taut, and Evelyn could almost feel the electricity crackling between them. Marlena didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned, as though weighing her options, her eyes scanning the room as she calculated her next move. Evelyn's heart pounded louder, her thoughts racing. She could feel the danger in every second, every breath they took. They were cornered. There was no easy escape. But then, without warning, Marlena snapped her fingers, and suddenly the front door crashed open, the sound deafening as a dozen men poured into the room. "You think you've won?" Marlena spat, her face twisted in a mask of rage. "You're just children playing at war, and you've made a fatal mistake." But in that moment, something shifted in Evelyn's chest, a quiet surge of strength she hadn't realized was there before. The twins were looking at her, their eyes full of courage, their faces set with the same determination that had carried them through the darkest days. They weren't afraid anymore. They were ready, and Evelyn wasn't going to let them face this alone. She wasn't going to let anyone take them from her. "Get ready," she whispered to Jonathan, her eyes locked with his. "This is it." Her voice was firm, steady, and Jonathan nodded, the corners of his lips lifting in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He knew. They both knew. This was their moment. The twins were moving now, stepping forward, their hands gripping each other, their bond unspoken but stronger than anything Marlena could throw at them. Family. It was the one thing Marlena could never understand. It was the one thing that had been Evelyn's secret weapon all along. Jonathan's voice, low but filled with purpose, broke through the tension. "We have one chance at this. No turning back." As the men neared, Evelyn's heart surged with love for her children, her family, her husband. Everything she had fought for was about to come to a head. This was the moment they would fight for everything. And in that moment, as the darkness of Marlena's empire loomed around them, Evelyn found something she hadn't known she was missing. A fierce, burning hope. The hope that they could fight back, that they could win this, that their love for one another was stronger than any force the world could throw at them. With that hope fueling her, Evelyn felt the last of her fear fade away. She wasn't afraid of Marlena. She wasn't afraid of anyone. "Let's finish this," she said, her voice steady. And with that, the final stand began. The room was alive with tension, each heartbeat a drum of fate, as Evelyn felt the full weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. The men in black, Marlena's ruthless enforcers, advanced with the confidence of those who thought victory was already theirs, their faces masked with indifference, as if they had no concept of the storm they were about to face. But Evelyn stood her ground, her back straight, the fire of her love for her children burning in her chest, and the truth in her hands. She would not let them fall into Marlena's hands. Jonathan's steady presence beside her reminded her of all the reasons they had to fight, even when the odds were stacked against them. The twins, no longer children in her eyes, but warriors in their own right, were ready for this. The years of secrecy, of hidden fears and whispered promises had come to this defining moment. As Jonathan's eyes met hers, the unsaid words between them were clear. Together, no matter what. "Move," one of the men ordered, but before anyone could react, Jonathan's voice cut through the air, calm yet filled with an authority that made even Marlena's men hesitate. "You don't have to do this." His words were not a plea, but a declaration, a truth that hung in the air, demanding recognition. But Marlena, standing just beyond the threshold, her icy eyes glinting with the satisfaction of someone who thought she had already won, took a step forward. "You're all fools," she sneered. "Do you really think you can defeat me, after everything I've built, after everything I've sacrificed?" Her gaze flickered over the children, her eyes calculating, cold. "You're still playing with fire, and you're going to get burned. You've all underestimated me. You've underestimated my power." Evelyn's heart clenched at the venom in her words, but she refused to let it show. She had spent too many years fighting in the shadows to back down now. The twins were by her side, their resolve as unshakable as hers, their love for their family radiating out of them like a beacon. They wouldn't let Marlena win. They couldn't. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice steady, unwavering. "You've had your game, Marlena. You've manipulated, controlled, and destroyed anyone who stood in your way. But your game ends today." A ripple of uncertainty passed through Marlena's stoic expression, but she quickly regained her composure, a cold smile tugging at her lips. "Do you think you've won? Do you think this little file is enough to stop me?" Evelyn held up the file, her fingers tight around it. "It's not just the file," she said, her voice rising with strength, with conviction. "It's the truth you've buried, the truth you've tried to erase." Jonathan's eyes flashed with a warning. "And you're not going to hide behind your power and lies anymore. The world is going to know what you've done." For a split second, Marlena's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing in a mixture of rage and disbelief. She took a step back, as though unsure of what to do next, her composure slipping for the first time. "You're playing a dangerous game," she spat. "You think you can expose me, but it's already too late. I've made my deals. I've tied up every loose end. There's nothing you can do." But Evelyn wasn't listening to her anymore. She was focused on the task at hand, on the children, on Jonathan, their future. The walls seemed to close in as the men from Marlena's faction moved closer, their presence a suffocating reminder that the stakes had never been higher. Her heart pounded in her chest, but there was no fear. Not anymore. With a final glance at Jonathan, she stepped forward, her voice commanding, fierce. "No, it's not too late. You've made mistakes, Marlena. And now we're going to make sure everyone knows the truth." For a moment, the room was still. The air was thick with the weight of Evelyn's words. And then, without warning, the door to the back office slammed open, and another figure stepped into the room. An unexpected ally, someone whose presence turned the tide. It was James, Jonathan's old partner, the one man who had disappeared from the scene when Jonathan had faked his death, but whose loyalty had never wavered. James's presence was a surprise, but a welcome one. The tides were turning. "I've got the backup you need," James said, his voice low and steady, his expression unreadable but determined. "It's time to end this." His arrival sent a jolt of energy through the room, like a spark lighting the fuse of a long-awaited explosion. The men from Marlena's faction hesitated, unsure of how to proceed now that their numbers were no longer enough to guarantee victory. Evelyn's heart surged. "You're not alone," James continued, as though reading her mind. "We're all in this together." His words were a balm to the raw wound of Evelyn's fears, the tension she had been carrying for years, now beginning to unravel. This was the turning point. The battle had begun. Marlena's face twisted in fury, her eyes flashing with the last remnants of her power. "You think you can win this, all of you? You're nothing. You're just a family, a group of fools. And you're about to find out exactly how much power I have. You've got nothing on me." But Jonathan, never one to back down, shot back with cold precision. "You've underestimated what we're willing to fight for, Marlena. And you've underestimated the people who truly matter. This is over." As the room filled with the sounds of Marlena's goons scrambling, trying to figure out what to do next, Evelyn realized that everything was in motion now. This was the moment they had fought for, the moment where everything they had suffered, the pain, the fear, the loss, would either destroy them or bring them to victory. But there was one thing Evelyn knew for sure. They were not going down without a fight. "Get them out of here," James ordered, his voice laced with urgency, and within seconds, Lucas and Lily were ushered to safety, hidden from the chaos that was about to unfold. The final confrontations was coming, and Marlena would not leave this room unscathed. As the first shots rang out, loud, sharp, and heavy, Evelyn's heart raced, but she wasn't afraid. This was her family. This was her fight. And they were going to win. They had to. The sound of the battle raged around them, but Evelyn stood firm, her resolve unwavering. This was the reckoning. And when the dust settled, Marlena's reign of terror would finally be over. The air was thick with smoke, a suffocating blanket that seemed to wrap around them as the room exploded into chaos. The sound of gunfire echoed off the walls, sharp and unforgiving, as the men Marlena had once commanded with iron will now scrambled, disoriented, caught off guard by the sudden shift in power. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow, but there was no time to pause, no time to dwell on fear. The stakes were too high. The fight wasn't just for their survival. It was for everything they had fought for: the future, the truth, and the safety of her children. She glanced at Jonathan, their eyes locking for a fleeting moment, a silent understanding passing between them. This was it. There was no turning back. They were in the middle of the storm now, and they would either emerge victorious or be swallowed whole by the wreckage. But Evelyn knew one thing deep in her soul. They couldn't lose. Not when they were so close to the truth. Not when Marlena's reign of manipulation and control was about to come crashing down. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, and in an instant, James, Jonathan's old partner, appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of determination. His voice was steady as he shouted to them, cutting through the chaos. "We've got to move now. It's the only chance we've got." Jonathan nodded, his jaw clenched in resolve. He didn't need to hear more. They had been playing this game for too long to hesitate now. They had no choice but to go all in. "Stay close," Jonathan said to Evelyn, his hand grabbing hers for just a moment. There was no time for words, no time for anything but action. "Keep them safe," he added, his gaze shifting to the children, who were now huddled together in the corner, their eyes wide with fear, but a flicker of hope shining through. Evelyn's heart broke at the sight of them. She had promised them safety. She had promised them peace. And she wasn't about to break that promise now. Marlena's men were closing in, their footsteps growing louder, and Evelyn could feel the tension building, thick as molasses, in the pit of her stomach. This was a battle they couldn't afford to lose. As the first wave of men crashed through the door, Jonathan was already moving, his body a blur as he grabbed the nearest weapon and aimed it with precision. The air was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder, but even in the chaos, Evelyn's focus never wavered. Her thoughts were laser-focused on keeping her children safe, on making sure they saw tomorrow, no matter what happened in this moment. The fight was brutal, raw, and messy. Every second felt like an eternity as she moved, ducking behind furniture, taking shots at any man who dared to approach her family. But amidst the gunfire and screams, Evelyn's eyes never left Jonathan. Every time he moved, every time he fired, her heart raced. But her love for him gave her strength. She could see the determination in his eyes, the same fierce, unwavering determination that had carried them both through the worst of their lives. They had fought side by side for years, and this was no different. They weren't going to lose. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. The twins, their faces pale but resolute, were moving on their own now, staying low to the ground, their young bodies agile, their minds sharp. Evelyn could see them using the skills they had learned over the years, skills she had taught them to protect themselves. But it was more than just that. It was the love she had poured into them, the lessons she had taught them about courage and hope, about standing up for what was right. That was guiding them now. They were ready. They were ready for this fight. The sounds of the battle continued to echo around them. But there was a brief moment of silence as Evelyn's gaze met Marlena's, the woman who had caused so much pain in their lives, the woman who had been their shadow for so long. Marlena's expression was one of fury, her eyes blazing with a cold, calculating rage that could freeze anyone who stood in her path. "You've won nothing," Marlena hissed, her voice thick with venom. "I will destroy you. I will destroy everything you've built." But Evelyn didn't flinch. She stood tall, her body steady, even as her heart raced with the intensity of the moment. "No," she said, her voice sharp, her words full of finality. "You're the one who's lost. This is where it ends." And with that, the final confrontation began. Marlena's men rushed forward, but they were disorganized, scrambling as the once mighty empire crumbled around them. The tables had turned. Evelyn and Jonathan were no longer the hunted. They were the ones in control, the ones who had the power to change the course of everything. The fight raged on, a blur of gunfire, shouting and chaos, but through it all, Evelyn kept her focus. She could hear the children behind her, the sounds of their movement, swift, strategic, and careful. She could feel them watching her, following her lead, and it filled her with a fierce pride. They were safe, they were strong, they were together, and nothing would tear them apart. But the final twist came when Marlena, in a last-ditch effort to regain control, reached for the detonator hidden in her pocket, her fingers trembling as she prepared to destroy everything. The building, the people inside, the future she had so desperately tried to hold on to. But before she could press the button, Jonathan was there, moving faster than Evelyn had ever seen him, his eyes sharp with determination as he tackled her to the ground, knocking the detonator from her hands. It was a brutal struggle, but Jonathan's grip was unyielding, and Marlena's strength faltered in the face of the truth she had tried so hard to bury. "It's over," Jonathan growled, his voice low, but the power behind it undeniable. "You've lost." And with that, Marlena's world came crashing down. The detonator was disabled. The chaos in the room began to settle, the sounds of struggle fading into silence, but the tension remained. Marlena, battered and broken, lay on the ground, her expression one of disbelief. She had underestimated them all. She had underestimated the power of love, of family, of the truth. As Evelyn's gaze swept over the wreckage of the battle, her heart swelled with a deep, overwhelming relief. The worst was over. They had won. The war was finished, and their family was safe. The truth had triumphed, and Evelyn knew, as she stood there amidst the dust and the chaos, that they had not just won a battle, they had won a future. Together. And that, more than anything, was worth fighting for. As the dust settled and the echoes of the battle faded, a profound silence descended upon the room. Marlena, once a figure of formidable power and manipulation, now lay defeated at Jonathan's feet, her body bruised and broken, but her defiant glare still burning with hatred. The air was thick with the remnants of chaos, the smell of gunpowder and fear mingling with the unmistakable scent of victory. Evelyn stood tall, her pulse still racing, but the overwhelming weight of relief flooded her chest. They had done it. They had won. The sound of Lucas and Lily's soft breaths brought her back to the moment, their trembling hands clutching each other as they huddled behind a fallen table, watching their mother with wide, awe-struck eyes. Evelyn's heart swelled with an emotion she could hardly name: pride, love, and a deep, unshakable sense of protection. They had come so far, fought so much, and it had all led to this moment, the moment where everything would change. Jonathan's arm snaked around her waist, pulling her close as his voice, low and filled with conviction, whispered in her ear. "It's over, Evelyn. We did it." His words felt like a soft balm on the raw edges of her heart, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to breathe. But as she exhaled, a chilling realization hit her like a wave. Marlena was still breathing. Her eyes flickered with something far darker than mere defeat, a glimmer of something that sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. "You think this is over?" Marlena sneered, her voice raspy but venomous. "You think you've won? You've merely delayed the inevitable. You're nothing more than a stepping stone in the game I've been playing. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something much worse." Evelyn's blood ran cold at the threat in her words, but Jonathan's grip tightened on her, grounding her in the present. The twins, still shaken, emerged from their hiding place, standing beside their mother, their young faces a mixture of fear and determination. Evelyn looked down at them, the weight of the promise she had made to protect them pressing heavily on her shoulders. They had been through so much, endured so many losses, but they were stronger now. She could see it in their eyes, the fire that had been ignited by everything they had endured together. They were ready for this. Marlena, however, was not finished. In a last-ditch attempt to regain control, she lunged toward the briefcase that had been discarded in the corner, her movements frantic. But before she could reach it, Evelyn was already there, her body moving faster than she ever thought possible, and in a blur of motion, she kicked the case away, sending it sliding across the floor. "Enough," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with rage, but also with the steady resolve of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You've lost. Your game is over." Jonathan moved forward, his eyes hard and unwavering as he grabbed Marlena's arm, pulling her to her feet. "You're done," he said, his voice icy. "You'll never hurt us again." But Marlena wasn't done yet. She spat, the remnants of her fury staining her expression. "You think you've defeated me, but you're wrong," she hissed. "You've merely disrupted my plans, and when you least expect it, I'll rise again. You can't stop me." Jonathan shook his head, his face set with finality. "You're finished, Marlena. You've underestimated us all, and you'll pay for everything you've done." But as he spoke, a distant sound, a faint ringing of alarms, echoed in the background. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Number not now. It was the unmistakable sound of emergency protocols. Marlena had set something in motion before the battle even began. The walls seemed to close in on them, the very air growing heavier with each passing second. "The building," Evelyn whispered, her eyes widening in horror. "She's triggered the self-destruct sequence." Jonathan's face paled as he looked around, his mind working at lightning speed. "We've got to get out of here. Now." Panic surged through Evelyn as she realized the full scope of what was happening. The walls were beginning to hum, a low, ominous sound that could only mean one thing. The entire structure was about to collapse. "The exits are blocked," she said, her voice rising with panic. "We're trapped!" The twins' eyes widened in fear, their bodies instinctively pressing against Evelyn. "Mom!" Lucas cried out, his voice raw with emotion. "What are we going to do?" Evelyn's mind raced, the clock ticking down in the background as she tried to formulate a plan. Think, think, think. But the seconds were slipping away, and the reality of their situation began to set in. The building was going to collapse, and they had no way out. Not unless. Jonathan's voice cut through her panic, calm, but filled with urgency. "There's a way," he said, pointing towards the far end of the room, where a small ventilation shaft was barely visible in the shadows. "We can crawl through that tunnel. It leads to the lower levels. If we hurry, we might make it." Evelyn's heart leapt in her chest. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "It's our only option," he replied. "We move fast. We stay together. We get out." Without hesitation, Evelyn grabbed her children's hands, pulling them towards the tunnel. They had come so far. They weren't going to lose now. They had to survive. As they crawled through the narrow space, the noise of the crumbling building grew louder, the walls groaning under the pressure. But with each inch they moved, Evelyn could feel the weight lifting, the tension easing, and the hope that they could make it out, that they could escape this nightmare, burning brighter. And then, just as they reached the end of the tunnel, they burst into the open air, the fresh scent of freedom hitting them like a wave. They were outside. They had made it. But even as they stood there, gasping for breath, Evelyn's heart remained heavy. Marlena had been defeated. The building had collapsed. But the world they lived in was still broken. There was still work to be done. But for the first time in years, Evelyn felt hope. The journey was far from over. But now, at least, there was a future for her family, for the children she had protected with every ounce of her being. As Jonathan's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close, and the twins stood beside them, their faces filled with wonder at their escape, Evelyn finally allowed herself to believe that they had not only survived, they had triumphed. And in that moment, the future didn't seem so uncertain anymore. It was theirs. Together. Forever.